All right, so we're going to do some integration now and matching the blacks and sort of getting it into the same realm here. So I'm just also enabling my dynamic despill, as it seems to help out a little bit with the edges there. And some areas like this seems to help out. So I'm going to keep the dynamic despill on for this particular case. We might need to go through and double check every area just to make sure, but I think it's okay for now. So first things first, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to gain up. And so the black level of this background, you know, it's quite extreme. We could probably lift it up just a little bit if we want before we, you know, push our foreground character back into this. Rather than just darkening everything, I'm going to do a little bit of a color correction on the background. So I'm going to do my color corrections before my dynamic despill is grabbing that information. Remember, if we do a correction after, you know, it's not going to affect our little dynamic despill setup there. So we want to make sure we do our corrections above that this specific dot. So we can put a section here and start to do a little bit of corrections. So I'll put a grade here and start to just lift it up a tiny bit, just to not have the blacks be so dark. And if we do that, we get a result that looks like this. Maybe that's a bit too much, so we want to keep it a little bit less. We can also take a bit of red out. We like this, the blacks here, or the darkest areas have a bit of blue in them, and when we lift that blacks, it goes a little bit neutral. So we can maintain that by just taking a little bit of the red out, and maybe a little bit of the green out as well. So we get something like this. So just lifting that picture very tiny amount and bringing everything a little bit together. This picture is actually from a stock photo website, a free, royalty-free website. So there's probably some corrections that this person did. So potentially there are some black levels that actually don't match in the background because this is already a corrected image. But for our use, it's okay. So another thing I want to do is the thing I was mentioning before. We're going to start to pop some of these highlights. But first, yeah, actually, we'll start with the blacks. So I'll label this as just black adjustment, and we'll just keep that here. And then I'll go over here. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to do a black adjustment. This is going to be the last color grade we do. We're going to do 2 adjustments, but you'll see these are going to be the last 2. So this is a grade, and we're going to select the black point. First, I'm going to start with this one. Because this black point is very different than this one, as we talked about multiple times. So I'm going to select this as the black point, and that's going to kind of push everything to actually being black in that spot. And then I'm going to lift it to the background point here. So I'm going to lift it to there. So now it's kind of shoving our black point to being the same as here. And maybe we even want to do it to here. That could also be a potential area. So the black looks a little bit darker in this area if I'm looking at it. So for whatever reason, this image has a little bit higher black point closer to us, which isn't usually the case. Usually this is darker, and then the further away you go, it will become a little bit lifted. So that's why I was saying we might be dealing with a color corrected image. So especially, yeah, if you compare these 2 spots, you know, it might be that these just aren't pure black, but it does look a little bit weird, so we might want to actually correct this. So I'm going to select in the window instead for our black point. And so, yeah, I'm going to go to the lake and then bring this up a little bit and then bring these down. So we want to kind of get these all feeling like they go together. So we'll go here, and we might need to put the roto before the whole parallax thing that's happening here. So I'm going to move this thing down, and I'm going to put the correction here so that when we put this correction, it's going to kind of move with our scene. So I'm just going to do a really sloppy roto for this whole lake area, and just slightly bring up the gamma a little bit. Not that much, but just a little bit. And it might be that we want to keep that contrast, like that kind of flattens it out a little bit. So what we might want to do is push the highlights up a little bit as well. So I'm going to go there and do a keyer before that. And I'm going to try to isolate the highlights in the water. So I'm going to go in there and sort of just get the highlights of the water like this. And we can mask it by that roto that we did. So we'll go like a mask, do something like this. And then we'll use that as a grade. And we'll just push those highlights up a tiny bit. So if we look, we're going to need to be careful because we're brightening all this area around. So maybe we'll use a different roto and we'll just sort of be a little bit more cautious with where we're placing it. And then we'll blur that out a little bit. And yeah, this part, we'll just kind of blur it out. Same with this one. We need to feather this so we don't have any sharp edges coming through. And then go back to normal exposure. So what did we do? We kind of just brought a little bit of contrast into there, and we got to be careful. You know, like on the boat, it went a little bit too bright. So we need to sort of keep that away. And now we'll look at this picture. And you see it just helps out. And having the water a little bit closer to his shirt kind of helps. We could probably do some stuff on this side as well. Like maybe some light from this building is going to light up the area below. So we can try a roto shape there. I don't know if it's going to work with our little setup here. That might be a little further than we need to go for just adjusting the blacks though. So we'll go to that next and see if we can do something more interesting for the balancing of this picture. But so now we have at least the black point of this guy set pretty close to there. If we gain up a bit, it still looks a little bit red to me, this area. So I think that's actually, you know, it looks like we've corrected it over here. So you see how he had a kind of a reddish tint in the black point? And so by selecting the black point and then lifting it to this blue, we're kind of correcting a bit of that red out. But it looks like there's some more red in the plate on this side. You know, if we go back to the original plate, you can actually look and just see what the original plate looks like. And it does look like that. So we have a red light closer on this side, and it's creating a bit of a red cast in the shirt there. So that area we need to treat a little bit differently. So again, we'll go here, another blacks adjustment. I'll call this one main blacks, and then this one screen left pocket. Screen left pocket. And then we'll basically select that as the black point. So I'm going to disable it, select this as the black point, and then select maybe that window again. We'll use that area as a good black point. So select that window and enable. And you see that changes our image quite a lot, but we don't want to do that to the whole image. Actually, we might actually want a little bit more of that. It's not too bad. It's too blue, but we could mix some of it actually overall the whole image. But what I'm going to do is do it like this. So I'm going to do a roto because we want more of that correction to be on this side where the orange light is. And then what we could do is sort of feather it off towards a little bit more of this area. Let me disable this so we don't click something accidentally. So you got to keep in mind that there are some lights on set. So the black points of this image are all different. So we want to make sure we're doing corrections with that in mind. It's not always just one black point and then, you know, you're done. So something like that is kind of interesting. We're going to do another one for the top half of him. So that looks a little bit better. If we disable and enable, it starts to feel like he's much more in the foreground. You know, when something is lifted like this, it's telling you that there's either atmosphere between you and that object, or the object is much further away, which is actually the same thing. It's kind of atmosphere in between, or smoke or something. So it doesn't make sense that the foreground character would be that lifted and then the background is not lifted. So that's something to look out for. This makes more sense to have darkness and then a bit lifted behind because there's probably some atmosphere or whatever, or mist. So I'm going to key this through. Just quickly kind of keep this sort of near the pocket area. And I'm going to do a separate correction for the top half just after. And that's good. And then we'll do our last black adjustment. And we'll say overhead light black adjustment. And that's because we need to fix all this glow. So again, we're going to do the same process. We're going to find what would be black in this area, probably right here in this collar. Select that as a black point. And you see it's going to go way too far if we enable it. But that's okay. We'll lift it to that window area. And let's just see how that's looking. So that's still a little bit weird. Let me try putting a roto shape and trying it that way. It might be that we need to do a gamma more than just a black point. So if I kind of feather this down something like this, I think it was just a bit too intensive an effect. So we can just sort of play with the mix there. We can kind of mix it in. We still have much too lifted around our corners here. So we need to sort of match the glow of that light that we were having on set. So we're going to have to kind of match that a little bit closer, because you see it's kind of working here on his face, but here it still feels very halo. And you know, this is going to be a color correction probably that we need to do on the edge there that might be left over. But let's try a radial. So let's try a we could do a radial. We could do, yeah, we'll do a radial. I'm going to set this properties panel to 1 so that we just have one thing going at the same time. Set the no clip, and then we'll just kind of scale this up a little bit and sort of place it. And then we'll just take the gamma and bring it down. So that's sort of helping. We can make it larger. And let's go to normal exposure just to see. So that's looking a lot better if we just compare turning it off and turning it on. So we're starting to get him in the realm. This is really distracting, this little edge here that we're going to need to correct. So we'll fix that. And some of the things here, you know, we're going to need to, I think, do some manual color corrections in there with some rotos. So let me just key that through again. So I'm going to take the roto that we did for the top, and we'll just scrub back just to make sure that there's nothing weird happening with the colors. So it seems about right. We might need to do another grade up here to darken it. This grade is working pretty well, I would say. The radio, I don't think I even need to move it, looks like. So we can set the area, we can set a key on the area, and we can go back to the start frame and sort of adjust it if we need to, but it doesn't look like that's necessarily the case. Okay, well, I still think there's not enough contrast here on his face, so I think we're going to do another roto. And we can take the main black, and we can actually put it, we could put it at the end just to make sure that our black point is going to be kind of stationary. So that's usually the last grade you do, is like selecting the deepest black and then putting it on something else. We're adjusting the black point in many different parts of this image, but overall we want the color of the black point to actually be the same. So it's good to have that as the last color correction that you do. And then the individual ones you do around, you know, you can do them separately. So I'm going to do another roto here. And you notice I'm always gained up here while I'm working. It just helps to see the darkest parts of the image when you're doing that. So I'm going to go here with a roto shape on his head and sort of just gamma down a little bit. So I'm looking back here, and I'm looking at the level of contrast. Even though these buildings are far away, there's still much more contrast. So we know that this character is not in the right contrast yet. So we can expand this and just sort of fade this over. So something like that is starting to feel a lot closer to to where this should be. So it's just a lot of gammas and black and the black point adjustment we did with the radial. I think, did we use a gamma, or we used a gamma, and we're using another gamma, but this one's just in a different spot. And we used a black point adjustment. So those are the 3 grades we did to sort of get this in the realm. Again, we're still having a lot of this little edge stuff where I think we're going to need to use some edge mats to get rid of this perceived halo. Here it goes a little bit contrasty, so I'm going to try to keep it maybe not so much on the face there. So I'm going to be a little bit careful because we don't want to push it too far. So I'll try to keep it sort of just there so it gets rid of that flatness look. And then we can just jump back to the start frame and just check out what's happening on the start frame. So it looks pretty good on the start frame as well, what's happening there. So we can continue through. See, this is what I want to be careful of as well, because that's starting to get a little bit, to me, that's breaking. So we might need to just be careful on that area. Yeah, if we just, we might just need to roto that and just lift that up a little bit, because very dark against very bright, that's not going to work. So that's really distracting as well. I just think that one of our gammas might be going a little too far. So if I go back to a roto here, I can sort of control where that's going, and maybe we just try to, if I take a, it just looks like this part of his head's a little bit darker in the picture. So I'm going to take a circle and just put a minus in our roto shape, so we can kind of exclude that part from our correction. And then just maybe feather that out a bit so that we can hide it. So you see, just helps it not be like a really dark part of the image. And again, if you're at normal exposure, you might not even notice this, but this is the right way to do it. So I'm just hitting Z to smooth that and pushing it through the shot. So we might need to adjust our key a little bit as well. It looks like it's a little bit see-through on his head. Yeah, it looks like it's the key, like our core mat might just need to be adjusted there. You see that that's where our alpha is going to matter. There might be some little edges there. So we'll go back and fix those things towards the end. But I want to get this starting to look kind of cool. So let's, we'll just try to, we can work back and forth, and there's no problem with that. So that's working pretty well, I think. So let's just go back. It's starting to feel much more integrated. We still have a couple edges that, you know, are conflicting. So really the one on shoulder and here. So if I disable and enable, you see how that really pushed him into the environment though. So it starts to feel like he belongs in this picture. And I'll just take a roto shape because it's only like one frame, I think. And we'll just make a color RGBA and merge it over. And I'm going to select and go to the, yeah, we'll draw a shape first. So go to the roto tab, we'll draw a shape. And we're just going to add a rope here so that we can actually be hanging onto something. And then go to the shape and then select the color, and then we'll select the little color that's part of this rope thing. And we'll just kind of feather that so it feels like it belongs together. We could add a texture as well if you want to add some kind of like texture. But it's sort of really blurred anyway, so it's not going to matter much. Maybe we'll just darken that as well. So just kind of darken it down so you see something there. So now it feels like he's actually riding up on some kind of rope. And then we can just keyframe that for a frame or two and make it feel like he's kind of swinging around. And we can modify the colors as well. So it looks like the lighting kind of changes. So we could kind of animate this lighting on the rope just so it kind of feels like the lighting is hitting different angles on it. And I'm going to turn the motion blur on as well. So I'm going to hit the little motion blur button. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Just to fill that little gap in there. I think we have a little crop problem as well, so that's something we could fix at the last stage, like the QC stage. So something else that's weird, looks like we have, let's just check that out. That might be an alpha problem. I'm not exactly sure where that's coming from. We'll need to fix that. So if I can go back here, yeah, it looks like we have a shape that shouldn't be in our roto. So I'm going to need to go back and fix that. It's in our pre-comp up here somewhere. But that's good for part one for the integration. We'll start to talk about doing some highlights, making the composition. We can tweak the colors of this. We can really bring up the streetlights to make it more like high dynamic range kind of looking, because this looks pretty flat right now. And just start to bring some range into this whole picture for the next step.